Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, this week I want to talk about second-hand thinking, and I want to start with a simple parable. I want to tell you about a duck that was raised by a family of chickens. From the time he was young, he was surrounded by chickens. He trained like a chicken. He was expected to behave like a chicken. So guess what? The duck did what all chickens did. He pecked at the ground. He scratched for food. He walked around with his head down, convinced the world was limited to whatever existed in that small, dusty patch of yard. Because that's what he'd been taught. That's all that he saw. That's what everyone around him believed and taught him. But one day, the duck noticed something strange. He didn't quite fit in to the rest of the family. His feet weren't like theirs, his instincts weren't like theirs, and his body didn't match their lifestyle. And in one of those moments of clarity that can change a life, he looked up, and for the very first time, he saw a pool of water. Now, I'm not talking about a puddle. I'm not talking about a small cup. He saw off in the distance a pond, and something inside of him woke up. Now, he didn't learn that day that he was a duck. He simply remembered what he already was. He realized that he wasn't born to scratch in the dirt. He wasn't born to live with the limitations of the chicken. He was built for something else. The duck is designed different than the chicken, and for the first time in his life, the duck understood that. He knew that he was made for water. And the only reason he didn't see it sooner is because he had spent his entire life living inside of someone else's belief system. Now, this, my friend, is what Napoleon Hill would call second-hand thinking. Now, most people don't think. Get that. Most people don't think. What do? They simply borrow the thoughts and beliefs of others. Now, in 1941, Napoleon Hill penned the classic book, How to Own Your Own Mind. And that book became one of the most important messages of mental clarity that was ever written. Why? Because it exposes something most people never stop to examine. You know, most of what we call my beliefs aren't really ours. They've been given to us, they've been absorbed by us, they've been repeated by us, and eventually defended by us. You know, Napoleon Hill said it best, and I want to give you this quote. He says, most of that which we express as individual belief is but a reflection of the belief or the pretend belief of those nearest us. Now, let me read that again. He said, most of that which we express as our individual belief is but a reflection of the belief or the pretend belief of those nearest us. Now, that's not an insult. That's a diagnosis, and it explains a very painful truth. You know, most people are walking around convinced they're thinking when in fact, what I believe they're really doing is simply reflecting the thoughts and beliefs of others. They're reflecting the ideas, the opinions, the assumptions, the fears, and the limitations of the people closest to them without even questioning whether those beliefs are sound, or useful, or true, or empowering. Now, this, my friends, is second-hand thinking, and it's one of the greatest hidden enemies to personal growth. Now, in the book that I shared just a few minutes ago, How to Own Your Own Mind, Napoleon Hill introduced a term that I believe deserves more attention today than it ever has. That term is social heredity. What is social heredity? It's a belief system that we inherit. Now, we don't inherit it through our DNA, but we inherit it through environmental influences. Social heredity is the mental programming that you and I receive from our upbringing, from our education, from our life experience, from external stimuli, from the people around us, from the culture that we live in, the media we consume, and the expectations that you and I have been trained to obey. So, in other words, social heredity is the operating system that we have installed in our mind, programmed into our thoughts before you and I ever had any conscious awareness to either choose it or reject it. And if you don't challenge social heredity, guess what? You're going to live inside of it forever. Now, Napoleon Hill identified six primary sources that shape and reinforce secondhand thinking. So, I want to take a few minutes and I want to walk through those because if you can learn to identify where your beliefs came from, you can finally decide whether or not you want to keep them. Now, the first is religious training. Now, while religious training can bring deep purpose, it can bring discipline, and it can bring moral clarity, it can also produce fear based obedience, shame based identity, or rigid thinking that discourages questioning. And if those beliefs are absorbed incorrectly, they can quietly sabotage our confidence, our achievement, and our personal freedom. Now, I'm a person of faith, and it's not a question of whether or not religion is good or bad. The question is this: are you thinking for yourself and truly understanding what religion means to you, or are you simply repeating what you were told? Now, the second source of secondhand thinking is educational training. Now, education is power because it gives us the ability to learn and to become more knowledgeable, and we can apply that knowledge in our lives to gain power, authority, and influence. But education can also train people to simply become an excellent test taker without ever teaching them how to be an independent thinker. Much of education today teaches us what to think rather than how to think. And as a result of that, far too many people leave the education system with a credential, a high school diploma, a college degree. They've got a credential, but they don't have any clarity. They've learned what to memorize. They've learned what to repeat. They've learned how to comply, and they've learned how to fit in. But guess what they haven't learned? They were never taught how to challenge, how to create, or how to think differently, or even to think at all. Understand this: a person can be educated and still not be mentally free. Now, the third source of secondhand thinking is political and economic training. Now, politics and economics shape what we believe about the world around us. It shapes what we believe about opportunity, about fairness, about money, about power, about influence, and it shapes the way we believe the world works. Now, some people have been trained to believe the system is rigged, so why try? Other people have been told that all rich people are evil, or maybe they've been told they'll never get ahead. And other people have been told the economy decides your future and success is out of your control. Now, this isn't thinking, this is programming. And the most dangerous part, people will passionately defend beliefs that they've never personally questioned or investigated to see if what they believe is actually true. Now, the fourth source of secondhand thinking is social engagement. This is peer pressure. This is the pressure of the crowd. This is groupthink. This is the desire to belong. This is the fear of being rejected. This is that subtle social rule that says, believe what we believe or you won't be accepted here. Now, that's why peer pressure doesn't end in high school. It simply becomes more sophisticated. Adults still do it today in business and in community. They just call it something different. They call it culture. They call it networking. They call it fitting in. They call it keeping the peace. They call it not rocking the boat. But at the end of the day, what is it? It's groupthink. It's peer pressure. It's the fear of not being accepted. Well, here's what I can tell you. We all have a circle of people that are a part of our inner circle, those individuals that influence our lives. Well, guess what? Your circle can elevate you, but it can also imprison you. Now, tradition, which is the fifth source of secondhand thinking, it's powerful because tradition makes us feel safe. Maybe you've heard a parent or a grandparent say, this is how we've always done it, so it must be right. That's how tradition becomes a cage. Tradition can keep families stuck. It can keep businesses outdated, and it can keep leaders from innovating. Tradition can do one of two things. It can preserve wisdom or it can preserve limitation. And only firsthand thinkers know how to tell the difference. Now, the sixth source of secondhand thinking is business, professional, and occupational training. Now, this one hits us hard because it comes wrapped in the wrapper of credibility. Now, why? Because we've been trained by mentors and managers and leaders, those most gifted in their fields. We've been immersed in industries that have survived for decades, some for centuries. We are enmeshed and immersed into job cultures that have been established for years and decades before we ever even thought about joining the team. And we often find ourselves held to professional expectations based upon the premise, this is the way things are done here. Do it this way. But sometimes professional training teaches people to think small. It teaches them to play not to lose rather than to play to win. It teaches them to follow the herd, to avoid risk, to stay safe, to stay average, and to accept the status quo because guess what? This is the way things are always done here. It trains survival instead of greatness. And if your professional environment rewards conformity, guess what? Most people will accept that trade. But here's the real issue. Most people never question what they're taught or why they were taught those things. They never question the quality of their thinking, nor realizing they may not be thinking at all, but reflecting the thoughts of others. So let's go back to the story that opened this lesson. The duck didn't fail because he lacked talent. He failed because he accepted chicken beliefs. The most important question in this entire lesson is a very simple but a very profound question. Do you question the influence and the influencers around you? Do you challenge the status quo? Do you examine the beliefs that you've been handed to see if they are real and true or not? Or do you just simply assume this is just how life is, and it's okay? Well, guess what? Secondhand thinking feels normal. Why? Because most people around you are engaged in secondhand thinking. That's why it feels normal. Everybody's doing it. To me, that's why the saying exists, birds of a feather flock together. Now, to me, that's great if you're soaring with eagles, but it may not be so great if you find yourself clucking with the chickens. Now, Jim Rohn put it very bluntly when he famously said, you become the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, think about that statement. You become the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, this doesn't mean that their habits rub off on you. It means their beliefs, their thoughts, and their behaviors get installed inside of you. You become programmed to be just like them. Now, don't miss this. Their standards, their excuses, their fears, their biases, their limitations, all of these and more are programmed into your thinking. And remember, as you think, you say, you do, and you become. So to me, secondhand thinking is a form of mental slavery, and that's why it's so dangerous. Secondhand thinking doesn't feel like oppression. It feels like reality. It feels like common sense, or maybe it just feels like being practical. But what is it really? It's nothing more than an inherited limitation. And here's the worst part. You're going to defend it. You're going to argue for it. You're going to fight to stay the same as you are right now. Why? Because secondhand thinking doesn't just restrict your life. Secondhand thinking becomes your identity. Did you get that? Secondhand thinking doesn't just restrict your life. It becomes your identity. Now, the mark of a successful person is this. They don't let other people do their thinking for them. They are independent thinkers. They engage in first-hand thinking. What's the difference? A secondhand thinker is going to ask, what do people like us do? Did you get that? What do people like us do? But a firsthand thinker is going to ask a different question. Is it true? Does this really work? Is this possible? Or is there another better way? Does it have to be done this way? What's next? Remember, successful people think for themselves. They don't automatically reject influence of other people, but they do inspect it. They do question it. They do research it. They don't accept the beliefs of other people just because they're popular. They accept beliefs because they are sound, they are tested, they are empowering, they are aligned with truth, and they are aligned with their purpose. This, my friends, is secondhand thinking. And secondhand thinking is not rebellion, it's ownership. It's mental leadership by challenging the status quo to change things for the better. So I want to give you a central truth. And if you get nothing else out of today's lesson, I want you to get this. And I hope this quote lands like a hammer with its impact. Let me give you this central truth. If we fail to think for ourselves, we become the victim of the faulty thinking of others. Let me say that again. If we fail to think for ourselves, we become the victim of the faulty thinking of others. Now, this is not a motivational quote. This is an operational quote. Why? Because the beliefs that you accept are going to determine the goals you set, the risk you take, the actions you avoid, as well as the actions you take, what you tolerate, what you pursue, and most importantly, what you become. So when you borrow the beliefs of broken people, guess what? You inherit their broken outcomes. So let me leave you with 3 essential questions that you need to use and you need to answer to move yourself from secondhand thinking to firsthand thinking. Here's the first. Which beliefs in my life did I inherit that I have not personally tested or questioned? Question number 2. Who benefits when I stay the same and who doesn't? Question number 3. If I truly believed that I was capable of saying, doing, and becoming more, what would I do differently starting tomorrow? Let me read those to you again. Which beliefs in my life did I inherit? Who benefits when I stay the same and who doesn't? And if I truly believed that I was capable, what would I do differently starting this week? You know, when you think about those 3 questions, what beliefs did you inherit you didn't personally test or question? Who benefits when you stay the same and who doesn't? And if you truly believe that you are capable of saying, doing, and becoming more, what would you do differently starting tomorrow? I want you to think about that. Answering those questions is how the duck became a duck. He didn't get a new body. He already had the body of a duck, but what he got was a brand new truth when he learned to think for himself. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to stop living life like a chicken. You weren't created to live small simply because the people around you think small. You weren't built to doubt yourself because someone else never overcame their doubts and realized that they were capable of saying, doing, and becoming more. You were not designed to stay stuck simply because tradition says, don't change. The status quo is okay. Understand this. You were not meant to live a second-hand life. So I want you to think about this as we wrap up today's installment. What beliefs are holding you back, even if they're not yours? What if your limited beliefs, the things you believe right now, were inherited and may or may not be true? What if your self-doubt is borrowed from a family member who spent their life not believing that they were capable of saying, doing, or becoming more? And what if your fear of success came from the people who never pushed forward to pursue it? Now, I hope, my friends, that for you, that's a wake-up call. Because if the limiting beliefs that held you back were never yours in the first place, Why do you hold on to those beliefs? If the limits you inherited are limiting beliefs, why do you hold on to those beliefs? If your self-doubt was borrowed, why don't you give it back? And if your fear of success came from people who never pursued it, why don't you give them their fear back and you step forward with courage? Again, this is your wake-up call to say, to do, and to become more. This is your wake-up call to stop borrowing limiting beliefs and start owning your mind and your thoughts. Let me leave you with this. A martial artist trains their body. A leader trains the team. But a black belt leader trains the mind. Because once you own your mind, you own your life. Remember, as you think, you say and do and become. This is firsthand thinking. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.